Our scripture reading is 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17 from the English Standard Version. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. The Apostle John, over the course of his 5 letters, uses the word love 83 times. Over and over, he's telling us who to love, what to love. And yet in this one instance here in our passage today, he tells us to not love something. Do not love the world or the things in the world. He tells us not to love those things. And for our time together, as we look into this particular part of 1 John, it's really important for us to answer 2 questions. 1, what is the world that we're not supposed to love? And 2, how do we make sure we don't love it? Well, let's pause for a moment and make sure we understand what the world means when he says, don't love the world or the things in the world. Let me just halt by saying it's really important for us to be careful not to bank into the conversation that says, Christians, here we go again. They never have any fun. They're the ones who aren't allowed to do anything neat, do anything fun, have any pleasure or any joy. Being a Christian means just willingly giving up all of your opportunity and access to good times, so to speak. Well, that couldn't be any further from the truth. This idea that Christians are not supposed to love the world is not the killjoy of being a person in this life. That when he says don't love the world or the things in the world, he's not talking about pleasure and joy. God is the very one who made those things for us to experience. But he's got a way for us to experience them the right way. We get some insight into what the world is when we go back to the creation account and then the experience that Adam and Eve had with Satan in Genesis chapter 3. If you recall in that story in Genesis chapter 3, there's a world that God has made that is good and beautiful. Everything that God has made, he says, this is good, this is good. And he made hundreds, if not thousands of trees that surrounded Adam and Eve. And they lived in a luscious garden that they got to enjoy. And there was what they called the shalom, the peace of God, the presence of God. And there was flourishing for all of the world. And in that garden, God said, there's one tree I want you to listen to me. Don't eat that tree. Out of all of the ones you can, don't eat that one. And I love pointing this out to people so they get the picture. When you see Adam and Eve in the garden, how many trees do you think they were allowed to eat? Hundreds, if not thousands, right? And how many trees were they not allowed to eat? Just one. So one of the deceptive lies of Satan is that life with God is restricting and no fun. And life without God is throwing off all the chains and you are free to do whatever you want. And the reality is the opposite is true. Life with God is liberating and fun and full of joy. Life with Satan is the one that's restricting, almost like a slavery. And so when you see the story unfold with Eve specifically and Satan comes to her and he deceives her. And he tells her a lie. And then it's Eve that convinces herself to eat the fruit. She looks at the fruit and says, well, it is good to make me wise, which God made the tree of life for. And then she goes, it's beautiful to look at, which Genesis 2:9 says God made trees for us to enjoy the beauty of them. And then she said, well, it will sustain my life, which God made, again, the tree of life for. You see, all those things that Eve began to convince herself to do, to eat that fruit, God had made a way for her to experience those things without that tree. But the one lie that Satan got her convinced of was basically this, that life with God is no fun. God is holding out on you. He told Eve this, God knows that the day you eat of this tree that you're not supposed to, that you'll become like him, knowing good and evil. And he doesn't want you to be like him. There's a life that's better that he doesn't want you to have. And so if you just throw off your trust of him, you'll finally find that life. That is the essence of the lie of Satan. That if we get rid of the restrictions of God, we will have the life that is the best life possible. Well, this leads to the essence of what sin is. Sin is basically just rebellion from the ways of God. And it leads to self-indulgence, where you just dive in and do whatever you think is right because that's when you throw off the relationship you have with God, that he is sovereign, and you follow him and you obey him, you're left just to follow and obey your own intuition, your own will. So that leads to self-indulgence. I'm going to do whatever I want to do to find joy and pleasure. It also leads to self-righteousness. I am the one who is right. I'm the center of the world, and what I think and my opinions are right. So self-indulgence and self-righteousness are the products of sin. You might call them this: desire and pride. That's the result of sin, which just says, I'll live by trusting myself and not trusting God. That description that I just gave you there is the essence of what John is saying not to love: the world. The Greeks had a word for the world. It's called the cosmos. And the word cosmos meant the order, the structure, the way things flowed, the laws of life. And John is saying this is how the world works. He's not talking about people. Like Jesus said, God so loved the world. That's people. Here he's talking about the system, the broken system of a sinful world that will not last forever. The broken system of a sinful world says, do what you want without God. It'll be better without him. Throw off his restraints, get rid of his oppressive ways of living, and you'll be happy. And John says, don't love the world. And then he goes on to explain what the world is. He says it's the lust of the flesh. We typically think that means sexuality, lust of the flesh, but really all lust of the flesh means is this hunger to do things on your own power, with your own ability, in your own ways. Lust of the flesh says, with my own resources, without considering God, I will do what I want to do. Then he moves to lust of the flesh, then lust of the eyes. That's basically coveting. Whatever I see, that's what I want. I'm going to go get it. If I see it with my eyes and that's the thing that I have pride in, I'm going to go get that thing. I'm going to do what I want because what I see in the here and now, I'm not living by faith anymore. I'm living by sight. Faith tells us there's something beyond what we're looking at right now. Faith tells us there's something more than just what's right in front of me. But living by the lust of the eyes says, I want what I want right now, what's right in front of me. So don't live by the lust of the flesh, by my own resources. Lust of the eyes, what I see right here and now. And then the pride of life. That word life there is the word bios. It's the word that they would use to describe their substance and their resources, what they had in their life. And he says, don't live by just the pride of what you accumulate. So I'm just doing things and I'm accumulating things so that people around me think that I'm impressive. He goes, don't live for the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, or the pride of life. Don't love those things. We have to be so careful in our walk of this life to not get swept up in the system of the way this world works. The system of the way that this world works, which is lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life, convinces us that through those pathways, you're going to find the way that you're supposed to live. And that's just simply not true. You'll end up with frustration and friction. You're going to end up with hostility and enmity. You're going to end up with strife, jealousy, covetousness. All of these things end up in our life, bitterness of heart and anger, because we're following that way. And he says, don't love that way. That leads us to the second question. If he tells us not to love the world, how do we stop loving it? Now, to get this, you got to be a very careful reader and notice the subtle thing that he's saying. Because I got to tell you, I've read this wrong for many years. I used to read it this way. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And I used to think it meant, when I love the world, I don't love God enough. Now, that's partially true. That's actually an accurate statement, but that's not what the text here is saying. In verse 15 again, it says, if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Do you notice carefully what he's saying? It's the love that belongs to God that's not in you fully. So here's the diagnosis. Anytime you find yourself in love with the system and the ways of the world, in that moment, you have either forgotten or not received how much God has loved you. So take that diagnosis and turn it into a prescription. How do you actually stop loving the world? You stop loving the world by receiving the amount of love that God has for you. You start pondering it and thinking about it. You start understanding the cost associated with him loving you, what it took for him to love you, and what his love does for you. And as you receive his love for you, you'll notice your hands beginning to release the system and ways of this world, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. and you'll see yourself beginning to transform from the inside out into the kind of person that He has designed and created you to be. So if you're ready to stop loving the world, you've got to start receiving the love of God for you.